Welcome to AMSA's webinar titled Mental Healthcare Tips and Resources to Support Migrant Workers. My name is Alejandra Paramo and I'm AMSA's Migrant Worker Support Coordinator. I will be facilitating today's webinar. Also with me today, making sure that everything runs smoothly in this webinar is Kan Aslan, AMSA's Multimedia Specialist. Thank you, Kan, for your outstanding tech support. Now, before we begin the webinar, we wish to acknowledge that the AMSA office is on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We would like to thank the Government of Canada's Migrant Worker Support Network for funding today's event. So I would like to introduce our presenter, Shirley Hogan. Shirley is currently working with the Canadian Mental Health Association in Kelowna as a workplace trainer advisor. She began her career as a facilitator and trainer over 25 years ago while living in Prince George and working for the local crisis and information center. She currently teaches mental health first aid and was a master trainer with Living Works facilitating the Assist Suicide Intervention program for over 10 years. Shirley's presentation will be focused on providing strategies to take care of one's mental health during the challenging times we're living in with the pandemic. As some of you might know, in the case of migrant workers, depression and anxiety were already common topics before COVID-19. For migrant workers, being away from their family and their community can now result even more difficult due to situations such as being in mandatory self-isolation upon arrival to Canada, fear of being exposed to the virus at work, and getting sick in a foreign country. So now more than ever, it's very important to find ways to better support them. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Shirley now, who's the expert. Thanks for being here today, Shirley.
All right, thank you very much, Alejandra, and I'm really excited to be here, and welcome to all of you guys that are here joining today. And I'm just going to see if I can, oh, there we go. I think I have access now. So welcome to our presentation, Mental Health and Migrant Workers. We're going to look at our agenda. So we're going to start off today just talking a little bit about a mental health overview. We'll talk a tiny bit about barriers to care, and then we're really going to focus most of our time on what it is that you can do, how it is that you can support your workers that are coming in, and sort of some of the things that we can do to help our mental health, especially during these really difficult times that we find ourselves in with the pandemic. So we know that for building a psychologically safe workplace, it really does require a lot of commitment, time. We need to prioritize this. We need to be able to have honest conversations, be willing to accept feedback. And it's really important that we remember that this is an ongoing process and it's not sort of a destination that we get to. All workplaces have strengths and all workplaces have areas where we can improve. So we're going to look at building on our strengths and seeing if we can improve something. And so just looking quickly at some of the risk factors, I know we just heard what some of them were, but looking over on the right-hand side of your screen at that social area. So we know that a lack of social support can have a negative impact on people's mental health. We know that recent negative life events, workplace relationships, all of those things can contribute, if they're not in a healthy place, to poor mental health. We also know that stress can be a big indicator for somebody that might be having some mental health issues. And so we're looking at this sort of just like Alejandra was saying, on top of our COVID-19. So we have migrant workers coming in that already have, these lack of social support, brand new workplaces, leaving old relationships behind. And we've increased this with this recent negative life event of the pandemic that we're currently living in. So some of the barriers to care that we already know are in existence: lack of access to healthcare. And again, now with COVID-19, not only do we maybe have a lack of access because of the distance and transportation issues, shift issues, but now we have clinics that have limited hours, or some that weren't even open. There's the extra fear of going to the hospital, the extra fear of speaking up and seeking help, right? So not only losing our job now, but also, maybe if we start sneezing, maybe we have an allergy and we start sneezing at work, and now we have to be quarantined, possibly without pay. So there's lots of fear going on I know I just was recently took advantage of the little bit of freedom we have here in BC and visited some family members. And my son-in-law was, feeling, he has allergies. He felt a little bit of tightness in his chest, and instantly he felt really guilty and he was quite stressed. So we know that if anyone is having any kind of health issues, there's can be this extra fear this year of speaking up. The language barriers, we already know that that's always an ongoing issue. Discrimination, stigma, and again, these things, we know that these are an issue every year when we have our workers coming in. And, really being aware of the fact that this year it's so much greater because of so many people are living with this extra level of fear right now. And we know that one of the core reasons for discrimination, for stigma, is fear. And so we just want to be extra aware of that for our people coming in, that what have they been experiencing, right? On their trip up to wherever they're coming to. Whether it be in the interior here or the lower mainland, what kinds of things did they experience on their travels? And how might that be affecting their mental health, even as they're showing up for work on day one? We know that here in BC, we're really lucky to have the 14 days of isolation, but that's also, possibly contributing to people coming in with maybe some mental health issues right off the get-go from that experience that was, it's put in place to keep us physically healthy, right? And to take care of our physical health, which is very important. But what kind of a mental effect is it having on us? Just think for yourself, if you were traveling and you're in a foreign country and now you're in a hotel all by yourself for 14 days and you can't really go out because you're quarantined there, and they're bringing you food, and that may be different. You're not able to talk to people. So just thinking of just that first 14 days and a little bit longer, their trip to get to Canada, how much extra discrimination did they feel? How much extra stigma did they eh, eh, have it happen to them? And how much of that self-stigma did they put on themselves, just interpreting people's behaviors? We know that mental health is discussed and experienced differently amongst our cultures. We know sometimes this can be a protective factor, but it's also something that we just want to be aware of. For some cultures, mental health is a no-no conversation. Even here in Canada, I've been working in this field for, 25, almost 30 years, going on close to that. And, you know, we still have people that have a hard time talking about mental health. There's still, even after all these years, that discrimination here in Canada, and we know that people are coming in, and sometimes it can be really difficult to talk about. Some of the protective factors. So we know that some of these things will contribute or can contribute to flourishing mental health. So how do we promote things like a safe home, financial security, sense of purpose, social connection, right? Again, we have people coming in, and if they're traveling all by themselves, how is that social connection, right? What can we do to help uh, foster that? A routine. And, again, routine is such a thing that we're all talking about today, because all of our routines have been sort of, everything is out of whack right now. And so how can we sort of try and build a routine for our people that are coming in so that they can get that little bit of feeling of safety? One thing with routine is that it can actually be one of the things that sometimes it feels like it can be constricting for us, but actually a routine gives us a great sense of safety, and a great sense of safety increases our mental well-being. We know culture and tradition can contribute to our flourishing mental health. So how can we bring some of those things in and promote these things for our employees that are coming in? And of course, good nutrition, physical activity. Lots of times when we talk about mental health and physical health, we talk about it as if they're two different things. And in fact, really, in order to have really good mental health, we also have to be physically healthy. And in order to be really physically healthy, we have to have good mental health. And the other sort of, if we look at that, think of it as a triangle, we have our physical health, our mental health, and then we have our social and spiritual health. And all of those three things need to be in balance with each other. So, what kinds of things can we do to help our employees coming in so that we can have these things in balance for them? So we wanted to be able to do things like consider religious and cultural differences and needs. You know, for a lot of people, even coming into Canada, and then if they're looking for some sort of medical assistance in some way, if they do get past the barrier of the fear for asking for help and the barriers of transportation for getting somewhere, suddenly when they arrive to the person that's supposed to help them, there can be lots of cultural differences. So we just want to keep those things in mind. And, just remember that for a lot of people, the antidote for fear is faith. And we get our faith through our religious activities, maybe some rituals. So we want to be able to keep those things in mind for our people coming in. And how can we allow them or offer them some opportunity for keeping up on those traditions that they have? We want to access to the internet and a way to communicate with family at home. This can be important all the time, but especially right now with our pandemic. I think that maybe last year we had workers coming in, and, sometimes we can have this idea that no news is good news. And so if I'm not hearing anything from my family or I'm not able to communicate with them that often, that's okay, because if something is really big happening, they're going to let me know. But right now, with everyone having sort of this extra fear that we're dealing with and going through, being able to communicate with our family at home is even more important this year, that knowing that everybody at home is safe or how people there are doing is going to be able to help keep our workers more focused on what it is that they're doing. We know also that for our physical health and our physical safety at work, we have to actually be mentally on the job. And so if we have our workers worrying about what's happening at home because they haven't been able to communicate with them, because they don't have proper access to the internet or those abilities to communicate, then, how are they actually focused on the task at hand? So we want to be able to ensure that they are able to have a way to communicate with their families so that they can focus on what it is that they're doing today. Considering time changes too, for some people, that can be a barrier. We want to be able to provide our resource information in multiple languages. And, one of the things that in the absence of real information, people will fill in the blanks. And so it's really important that we provide our workers with as much information as we can. We don't want to do information overload, of course, but we really want to give them the information that they need in order to feel safe. And, again, that routine and those barriers that we put around us can really help eliminate stress. So we have a lot of stress right now with things that we can't control, right? So we have our migrant workers coming in. There's lots of things there that they can't control. They can't control that they've had to leave their family and all those sorts of things. So we really want to try and empower them while they're here, that they can feel a sense of safety and a sense of control around their day-to-day responsibilities and the duties and maybe any extra rules around social distancing and hand washing and those sorts of things. So we want to, when we're providing them with those rules and regulations that are designed to help keep them safe physically and mentally, so that they know what's expected, in multiple languages. We want to make sure that we have a bullying and harassment policy, and again, consider those language barriers for people. Right now, again, with fear, we know that fear can have a lot of different effects on people, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, you know, it's going to be really important that we have that harassment and bullying policy right now. We already are seeing in different places throughout our country and globally extra discrimination this year. Again, people are afraid, they want to blame, and then that again can lead to those behaviors that we want to really avoid in order for us to have a healthy and safe workplace. We want to check in with our workers. And so we want to be able to just see how they're doing, check in with them, and then provide feedback on performance. Sometimes when we have a worker coming in and we know that it's for a limited time frame, we forget sometimes, I think, the value of that feedback on performance. Again, in the absence of real information, people will just fill in the blanks. They will interpret what's happening and they will fill in the blanks. And so we know that for a lot of us right now, while we're going through this pandemic, our emotions can be up and down. I know lots of people that are working in Canada, that live in Canada, are from Canada, and because of the pandemic, their mental health right now is they feel sometimes like they're on a roller coaster. So we're all going through this together in different ways. But if we have a worker and we haven't provided them any feedback on their performance, we haven't been giving them as much information maybe as what they could use, then what they're going to possibly be doing is judging what's going on based on the emotions of their employer and their supervisors. And so we know that there's a good likelihood that our performers, our employers, and our supervisors are on the same roller coaster because we're all in this pandemic together. So now our workers, unaware of that, might be in a position where they're actually thinking, this is about me. And so we've increased their stress for something that has nothing to do with them. And, it can just be a little thing like letting them know that they did a good job today. Or sitting down with them and being clear on what's expected of them, and then letting them know whether or not they are meeting those expectations. We know for a fact that there is a huge correlation between stress and mental illness. And so we want to be able to do whatever we can to reduce our workers' stress. And so one of the things that we can do is let them know performance on their feedback, where they can do things better or what they're already doing really well, so that they get to go home from the day knowing what they need to do differently tomorrow, or really confident in the fact that they're actually going to be invited back tomorrow, they have a job tomorrow, and that things are good, even if the people around them were on a bit of a roller coaster emotionally. We want to try our best to provide social opportunities and social interactions. Again, in this is an issue we for every year being able to do this, especially when you have people coming in from different cultures and different communities that don't know each other. It can be very isolating. And so we want to be able to provide those opportunities for those social interactions. And, keeping in mind, of course, our physical distancing. One of the other things that we can do is encourage a peer support or establish a buddy system. So if you have a worker who's coming back, and this particular worker, maybe you've got a couple of them that they're pretty solid and they've been with you for numerous years, and you've got some other people coming into your place for the first time, establish those little buddy systems and let them work with someone that speaks the same language, maybe from a similar culture, that can really help bring someone new in and can sort of show them the lay of the land, so to speak, and um, develop some trust with somebody. Because the other thing is that when we have people who might not be doing so well mentally, it can be difficult for them. It can be difficult for all of us, even those that are still living in our home community, to reach out and ask for help. So we can just imagine if it's difficult in our home communities to reach out and ask for help, how difficult is that if you're in a completely new environment with people that are new to you? right? There's the language barrier, but then there's the trust barrier too. And so, if we establish buddy systems right from the beginning, some of that trust can already start to be built. And, we can start building the trust just with letting people feel safe with us, telling them, where the parameters of our work is, where they're going to be sleeping, where they're going to do this. And so that they feel secure in that. And then, should something be happening for them later, there's already a little bit of trust that's been developed there versus just having to sort of pick somebody out of the crowd to try and reach out to, which can be very difficult, if not almost impossible for a lot of people. This responding with compassion for the increased stress. You know, I, Bonnie, here in British Columbia, those of us that are from BC have probably listened a lot to Dr. Bonnie Henry. And, she ends almost all of her media releases, or she certainly was in the beginning, reminding everyone to be kind, right? And I think that that's something that we all really have to remember on a day-to-day basis, but especially for our workers that are coming in, that we don't know what kind of experiences they're leaving in their communities. We don't know how concerned they are for their families in their communities. We don't know what their experience was coming up to their new place of employment. We don't know how they managed with their 14 days of quarantine. And so it's really important that whenever we're communicating, that we're just responding with that extra bit of compassion this year. We know some of the effects of stress are forgetfulness, being distracted, um, inability to concentrate, making poor decisions. And so, the more that we can have compassion for our workers, the more that we can sort of just start off with that kind of a relationship, which I know can seem a little bit different from, like, well, I'm the employer, I'm the boss. And, we want to be able to just have that extra compassion this year, have that empathy for that increased fear that so many of us have. And not only the fear of getting the illness, but there's the fear of giving the illness too, or of just doing the wrong thing. I know I have a friend of mine that's currently, she lives in Kamloops. She's Canadian, she's from Canada. And when she goes shopping, she has a lot of fear that what if she does the wrong thing? What if she walks too close to somebody? What if she breaks a rule that she's not sure is a rule right now? And so we just want to have some empathy for our people because already they might be coming into a new culture and we have all these extra rules around COVID-19. We want to make sure that we're following all of the federal and provincial safety guidelines. Again, remembering that correlation between physical safety and mental health. And the more that our workers feel that we are seriously taking into consideration their physical safety, that will lower their stress level, which will help their mental well-being. Some of the other things that we want to do, we want things to look out for. So we want to watch out for if, we have a worker that suddenly is really isolating themselves. And I don't mean like related to the COVID-19 isolation or quarantine. I mean where they are really sort of not communicating with people. They're really sort of putting a wall up. We want to watch out for that. We actually want to watch out for any changes in behavior. We know that somebody who's not doing well mentally often will see lots of different changes in their behavior, or suddenly they're just not showing up. They're absent from work. They're just staying in their room. We want to watch out for also unsafe work practices. Sometimes, again, when we've already talked about this a bit, as we're not able to, our mental health is compromised, then we have a lack of focus. Poor decision making might lead to those unsafe work practices. We're looking out for that. That might not be a disregard for personal safety. That might be a too overwhelmed to be focused on what I'm actually supposed to be doing here. Anger or aggression is another really big indicator that somebody might not be doing well mentally. Now, when we talk about anger, lots of times anger or aggression can actually be an emotional response to another underlying emotion, most often fear. And so we want to remember that we've got everyone with this extra level of fear, right? And so for some people, that fear is going to come through and show through in anger or aggression. So we want to look out for that. We want to watch out also for substance use, right? People are self medicating. We know that this is happening already. We can see that just with the increased sales of alcohol and cannabis here in Canada, where it's both of those two substances are legal and we're able to purchase them, which means we're able to monitor the increase in them. So, that's another thing we just want to watch out for is that substance use, because that will be a way that people historically have coped with extra stress that they might be under. The other thing we want to make sure that we're doing is communicating clearly. And again, keeping in mind our cultural differences and those language barriers. Here also is an opportunity where if we've had the opportunity to have sort of a buddy system, maybe if we're communicating with someone now that we don't know as well, maybe they haven't come to work with us for many years in a row. And so we're going to try and have a difficult conversation with them. Sometimes maybe bringing that buddy in can help with that so that we can ensure that we're really communicating clearly and stating what we've noticed, right? Sometimes we're so afraid to talk to our people because we're not sure, well, is this my business or not? Well, if it's affecting their work, it actually is your business. And then remembering that for a lot of people, they might not have anywhere else to go to talk about this stuff. And so we want to be able to state what we noticed, right? And it can be something really simple as, hey, I noticed when you first got here, you were quite cheerful and chatting with everybody, but you're pretty quiet these days. Is everything okay? Right? Or, I noticed that you don't seem to be quite as focused when you're here at work. We kind of seem to be daydreaming a bit. How's everything going? Are you doing okay? And we can just start our conversations that way. And we want to just be able to actively listen to what's going on for our people. You know, in this situation, there are no real solutions for a lot of stuff, right? None of us have the ability to get rid of this pandemic. None of us have the ability to, if you have a worker that's really missing their family, the solution isn't going to be, well, I'll send you home for the weekend, right? But what the solution can be is we just take the time to just listen to what's going on for them and really encourage your people to support each other. Right, which again is where, if we're doing that opportunities for social connection, and that buddy system, then they can actually be actively listening to each other. And we don't have to be the sole provider of that. Sometimes we can even just sort of have, evenings where around either a campfire or a propane fire, we're encouraging people just to share, like, where are they from, or share some information around their family, share some information around what their commute up was like, just so that we can start to build. Sometimes trust gets built in those day-to-day conversations. We don't build trust right away with somebody talking about what's truly going on for us. We build trust with talking about the weather, and then talking about our family, and then talking about our history, and then talking about what's going on for us. So we want to offer our people the opportunity to do that, not only with us, but also with each other, so that the whole organization is built around this idea of, your mental health is just as important to me as your physical health is. And the other thing too, we want to know our limitations and keep our conversations professional, right? So keep them based on work, especially as we're sort of exploring this. We're not suddenly becoming counselors here, so we want to make sure that we're able to offer any resources Again, we do have lots of free resources right now in British Columbia. If nothing good has come out of this pandemic, that might be one of the things, is that suddenly there's a lot more access to mental health supports for people, that we don't have to actually physically go somewhere. So, there's lots of different resources on the computer, and there's phone-in counselors that are available. Our crisis lines have all increased their capacity, so that those opportunities are there, that people can reach out. Remembering empathy, right? Just being empathic, just remembering, how we feel sometimes with the fear of what's going on, and then imagining what that might be like if now you're in a foreign country. Right? The fear of getting sick when you're here, coming here so that you can make money to provide for your family back home. And if you're sick the whole time you're here, then that it negates all of that. And also, what does it look like to be ill in a foreign country, which we talked about in the beginning? Also remembering that you're not trained to diagnose or to, again, suddenly be a counselor or a therapist, but we can help reduce stress by talking. We don't need to give people advice of, how they can fix everything and that might be going on for them, but by just offering them an opportunity for us to say, it's okay. Right? It is okay that we're all feeling up and down right now. We want to keep our relationship professional, and we want to make sure that we do have those boundaries. Um, and remembering that, our role is, we have our role, and then they have their part, and we're not sort of trying to cross those boundaries. We're not bringing somebody that is having issues with their mental health right now, and they're struggling with what's going on. Maybe they're feeling very depressed, or engaging in substance use to a point that we're concerned about them. We're not suddenly bringing them into our house so that we can care for them and watch them. We're still having those boundaries, and we're having our boundaries to keep not only ourselves safe, but all the other workers safe too, right? And so we want to make sure that that those sort of healthy boundaries are in place for everybody. Um, and then that too will help, not only the person who might be struggling, but remembering that everyone around is also watching. So how we deal with the person who's struggling is also sending a big message to those people who are sort of managing maybe a little bit better. But again, because of this pandemic that we're in, we all have the opportunity to be on way more of a roller coaster this summer and this season than maybe any other season that we've ever had, and hopefully with any luck that we will ever have again. And so we just really want to have just that extra awareness around what might be happening for our people, an extra ear out, watching extra carefully, not only to how are they managing themselves physically, but what might be going on for them emotionally. We know also that we're going to have time for questions. I'm just looking at my time here. We know also, though, that the longer that we leave something, the harder it is to get back. And so, sometimes what we want to do is we want to wait until it gets really bad before we address it, hoping maybe that it'll sort itself out or figure itself out. And in fact, what we want to do is the time to ask somebody how they're doing is when we notice that something is off for them. So we don't need to wait until they've gone down that path really far before we step in and offer some assistance. If we think about it, I like to think about our mental health sometimes in relation to how our physical health is. And, if we think about our physical health being on a spectrum of healthy to unhealthy, and if we go through and, we're very healthy, but suddenly we start to get a bit of a cold, and then we might, if we don't do anything, we start to get sicker and sicker until possibly, if there's no intervention, we end up in the hospital with pneumonia. And then if we think of our mental health on that same type of a continuum, so we're in a mentally healthy place, but we have some stress, and that can be just the things that all of our workers are going through right now, leaving their homes in a new country, COVID-19. All of these stressors can start to move us toward that continuum, toward that lower mental health. But the quicker that we identify that we're moving down there and address those issues, the quicker that we get to go back to that more healthy or optimum mental health place. So we want to be watching out for our people this year more than any other so that we can know to offer those support systems earlier rather than waiting until we get too far down, and it becomes more difficult to get back to healthy. Just like if we're in the hospital with pneumonia, we can still go back to being physically healthy, but it's sure a lot harder to get there than it was when we just had the sniffles and we're feeling a bit run down if we would have stopped and taken care of ourselves then. I'm really cognitive of the time here, so I'm going to open it up now for questions. So I'm not sure if anyone had any questions. I think that someone is taking care of that for me.
Yes, thank you so much, Shirley, for your insightful presentation. Please submit your questions now for Shirley using the GoToWebinar question box or tweet using the hashtag AMSA events, or you can also email your questions to apudel@amsa.org. Okay, so we have some questions coming in here. Shirley, so there have been some cases where migrant workers are arriving to Canada and they need to complete the mandatory 14-day self-isolation. So some of them are completing this self-isolation in hotels by themselves. What are some strategies for them to take care of their mental health where they while they're by themselves inside of these hotels?
And you know that, like I sort of mentioned at the beginning, the 14 days is such a great thing for them physically and has the potential to have some devastating effects emotionally for people. And so it's going to be really important that we offer them some sort of social connection there. So making sure that our people have access to either phone calls with their family back home. Maybe if we have numerous people, again, based on technology, trying to figure out how we can just communicate with them. So as an employer, it's going to take some time, but really what I would suggest is having a conversation with each of your workers every day. For some of our people, we have introverts and extroverts. Our introverts might, be able to manage this a little better than our poor extroverts that really need that social connection. So that's going to be our number one thing, is figuring out really creative ways in order to help them have some sort of social connection. And whether that's through technology that they were able to bring with themselves, or maybe offering them some sort of technology to be able to do that. And the other thing too, we really want to encourage them to limit the amount of news media that they're watching. We know that when people are watching too much of the news, too much of that information coming in, it's increasing people's stress. So we want to encourage them maybe to check it out in the morning, check it out in the evening, and then find something to watch on television during the day that is light. I know recently my daughter and we were picking out something to watch for television, and she's 30, but we went on the Disney Channel to find something because we just wanted some sort of a feel-good kind of movie. So encouraging sort of that sort of activity. Unfortunately, it's going to be really difficult for those people coming out of those 14 days for some of them.
For sure, it is a very difficult situation, especially when you don't know the place, right?
And yeah,
Yes.
feels a
We
little
have
bit like
another,
they put you in jail right off the bat.
yeah, totally. Coming to a new country and then being locked for 14 days.
Yeah. So I think the other big piece of that is making sure that everyone is aware that that's going to happen.
Okay, I have another question here. It says, I know we're looking at the current situation, but I'm wondering if you're seeing long-term comorbid effects from the 2017 fire season in immigrants that were in the Caribou during that wildfire season. So if I guess the question is related to if there are migrant workers that might be affected mentally because of the wildfires that happened in 2017. Have you heard anything related, Shirley?
I personally haven't heard anything related. Now, that of course doesn't mean that there aren't some related instances. And I think that, again, that's just going back to that whole idea of that fear and being really aware of the fact that so many of our workers coming in, there's so much fear with them, right? So, whether that's based on previous experiences that they had here in Canada, or with our current pandemic that we have, or just if it's their first time being away, first time being in Canada. So, again, just really being aware of that fear and having the compassion for it, regardless of where it comes from.
For sure. We have a comment here that says they're starting to help migrant workers installing Zoom. So this is a comment from a settlement organization. She's saying they're helping them install Zoom in their computer. So that's a great strategy too, to keep connected with their family.
Excellent. Yes, because that's going to be really important this year, probably more than any other year.
Yeah, for sure. And there's another question here. When you're living with with a negative person, what can you do, I guess, to cope with the situation?
Mhm. And that again, can really sort of trying to take our time. We know that when we're living with that person, there might be times when we can't actually physically distance ourselves from them. But what we want to be able to do then is in those different times of the opportunity that we have to get away from them, to have that physical distance from them. And then we also just need to remember that the things that we have in our control and the things that are outside of our control. And other people's opinions and choices and conversations and feelings are outside of our control. And if we can continue to remember that, and then just remind ourselves, one of the sayings that I love is thank God for the bad example, right? Because that can really help me to reframe what's going on. If I see something, again, having that compassion and, just thank goodness that I'm not in that place. And, just continuing to remind that person, just, just reminding yourself of what kinds of things that you have to be grateful for. Because really, at the end of the day, all we have control over is our own selves.
Right. It's important to be mindful on our own feelings and thoughts.
Yes, yeah, and try and just keep. I know it can be difficult that they can. It feels like that they can affect us, and it feels like sometimes like we don't actually have control of our own emotions. And when we learn to just really remember and know that we do, and then it's just again that mindfulness of just focusing really on what do I have control over here. I don't need to fall into the same negative feelings that that person is having. And we need to sometimes cognitively really have those specific conversations with ourselves.
Correct. We have another question here. It says, prior to COVID-19, immigrants from certain cultures find it difficult to seek counseling due to cultural myths.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the availability now of more resources to help with that? I guess it refers to like cultural appropriate help
Mm-hmm.
for mental
Yeah.
health.
And yeah, and that is one of the things that that I think we're still struggling with a little bit is that, even though even Canada is a multicultural country, I do think that often we do struggle with ensuring that we do have those that cultural supports available. And, sometimes then, our support doesn't always come from someone with a degree or a therapist or, a counselor. Sometimes we get really great support from our community. And, so taking, say some of our workers that are coming in, and if we have communities that are already set up, then they might be doing some cultural activities, and if we can hook our people up with some of that, sometimes they can get the support, more culturally appropriate support in that social environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's important to have a connection with our community and feel more understood to some extent when you
Yes,
interact with your people.
exactly. Yeah. So sometimes that can, it doesn't necessarily, of course, it can't replace therapeutic help if that's the requirement, but sometimes it can supplement it. So we still feel like we're getting some of our cultural needs met.
Yeah, for sure. Our next question here, it says, racism has always been a major issue, and now with COVID-19, we have been seeing more racist acts. You have mentioned this before, Shirley. What will you do now to, what and how will you suggest to handle situations like this? And yeah, like what tips do you have for migrant workers to handle with racism?
And I think that the very first thing is that the culture is determined right from the beginning. So as soon as everyone is coming in, we make it very clear that this is not acceptable behavior. And then if it's identified, that it's addressed and that there are some sort of consequences for that kind of behavior. And I think that that is the way. I don't think that we're ever going to be in a position, at least not in my lifetime anyway, where we get to completely eliminate discrimination. Unfortunately, but what we can do is we can make sure that those behaviors are so inappropriate that people will, regardless of how they feel, keep it to themselves. And if it does happen, that we're setting up a system in place where people know that it's that they're safe to report it and that they won't be penalized for reporting it. We're so afraid sometimes we don't want to rock the boat, especially if we're only in Canada working for a short amount of time. We want to just be able to come in and kind of fly under the radar, but that can also put us in a mentally unhealthy place. So we want to set that sort of groundwork right off the get-go, that this is not acceptable here, and we are going to take care of our people.
That's right. It's so important to speak up when something is not right.
Mm-hmm. And have the permission, be given the permission right from the beginning.
For sure. Our next question here, it says, do you know how to get resources in other languages? Like, for example, psychologists, counselors. Do you have that information, Shirley?
What I do know is that there are some language lines available that can assist with that. Unfortunately, the cost might make that be inhibitive for the majority of people, but it is an option. And then again, I think that, hooking in with those services that are already available here in Canada, either through our immigrant multi-services positions, also by having somebody that they trust that can maybe interpret for them. I'm not sure that we don't, again, even though Canada is multicultural, we often are lacking in offering all of our services in different languages. It really is sort of still a gap in service here in Canada.
Yeah, for sure. It's a question that comes up very often about resources in other languages. If we find any, or if you have any, Shirley, I can put together a document and share it with all the webinar participants if you have any specific information that
Perfect.
might
And
be
you know
available.
what? I'll do a little research and I'll see what I can come up with so that we can, if I can find anything, we can make sure that we can share it with everybody.
Sure, thank you. Our next question says, how can you state what you have noticed in someone, like changes that you have noticed in someone, while at the same time being mindful about personal space and cultural sensitivity?
Mhm. And again, it's really trying to do it in a way that is as comfortable as we can. So, you know, often we think about having these conversations and we think about bringing somebody into an office and sitting across a desk. And that, just that alone, can be way too intimidating. You're not going to get any honest answers just from that simple thing there. But maybe just if you have somebody and they're out picking somewhere, you know, you can bring them maybe to a little area that's away from some of the other workers, but still outside. You know, you can be your 2 meters away and trying to have that conversation in the most relaxed way, right? So trying to make it not so formal, but more of a supportive type of conversation and very casual, opening up like just, hey, this is what I noticed, right? And you can even just start off with, hey, can you come over here and help me pick over here for a few minutes? And you guys can go over to the side and still sort of be outside amongst the, you know, outside where it's more comfortable, less formal.
Right. Okay, I have a few more questions here, but we're close to 11, so I'll close it for now. If you have more questions, please keep sending them to our email address, or you can send them to apudel@apsa.org, and we'll make sure to get you some answers. So thank you so much, Shirley, for all of the answers that you gave us and your great presentation.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank all of you guys for being here, and you know, just having the willingness to take the time out of your already really busy schedules to learn a little bit more about this. I think that it's so important, and I think it's just wonderful when people take time out of their day to find ways that they can help support their employees. I love that. So thank you so much for inviting me and for participating with me here today.
Thank you, Shirley. And just some things before we close. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be emailing participants an online evaluation form. Please take some time to fill it out. AMSA relies greatly on the feedback provided in the evaluations to plan future events and trainings. And a special thank you to Shirley again for sharing her experience to help support migrant workers, and to the AMSA team working in the background supporting this webinar, Khan, Sabrina, Alice, and Melissa. Again, we would like to thank the Government of Canada's Migrant Workers Support Network for funding today's event. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.